Hi there, Suzanne Smith with the Background Briefing podcast. We're back after a short winter break and we're excited to share with you our next series of investigations. This week, David Lewis brings you a story about a radical change to the way people with severe disability are going to be housed in New South Wales. The state government is selling off all its group homes, and the people who live there and their families are raising the alarm.
His personality is very changeable. He can be happy, he can be aggressive, he can be sad, and nobody's really sure why those things happen because he has very minimal ability to communicate.
Meet Lynn Clinkett. Her son Matt is 30 years old. He has severe autism and developed at a slower rate compared to other children. Their life is a roller coaster. Matt's emotions are unpredictable. He needs 24-hour care, and he's getting it from a government-run group home on the New South Wales mid-north coast. In the 11 years he's been there, Lynn says his behaviour has improved out of sight.
The serious incidents are down to practically nothing compared to how we were travelling prior to that.
What do you mean by serious incidents?
Well, Matt attacking somebody by grabbing them perhaps around the head, kind of whisking their feet out from under them and ending up in a heap on the floor with him on top of them, or perhaps with his hands around their throat.
Despite feeling he's in good hands at the government-run group home, life is never easy for a parent whose child has such complex needs. Do you ever wish things were different? I hope it's not an insensitive question, but were there ever times when you wish this wasn't your life?
Of course. I've wished that, I suppose, at times. Ever since Maddie was born, I just wished it wasn't my life, but wished it wasn't his and his siblings.
Are you reluctant to ask for their support?
I am. I wouldn't put this on them. They've got their lives now. They didn't ask to have a brother like Maddie. I've just told them that they're never to forget they do and not to completely neglect him, but they have to live their lives. I'm sorry.
A team of people care for Matt, and the staff ensure he meets all his appointments. And he gets to do stuff like swimming and canoeing, thanks to a daytime activity program. It helps a lot. Matt loves being near or in the water. But his mum, Lynn, like many other parents, is terrified of a big change in how some people with severe disability are going to be housed in New South Wales.
And everything seemed to be going along smoothly, and now it's all going to change.
The New South Wales government is privatising all of its roughly 350 group homes for people with disability. They'll soon be handed over to for-profit and community organisations. Matt's group home is one of them. And Lynn worries her son will be too expensive for whoever takes over.
People like Matt are not really cost-effective in terms of what it costs to care for them, by the number of workers they'd need, what they'd have to pay experienced people who know how to care for people with needs like this. So I can see that people like Matt are going to be some of the ones that get evicted quite quickly, because if they don't understand what his wants and needs are, if they don't understand how to communicate with him, if they trigger things that set him off, he is going to become aggressive. I can't see him lasting too long.
The state opposition is against the policy. It says the New South Wales government is trying to save money.
It's like everything else that they've done, whether it's electricity or other services, the Land Titles Office, they just want to privatise the provision of government services.
The government will hand over management of the homes first and sell them later. Labor's Shadow Minister for Disability Services, Sophie Kotsis, says all up, the privatisation of disability housing will raise around $800 million. She wants a parliamentary inquiry into the impact the sale will have on the most vulnerable.
We're just not going to outsource and privatise for the sake of ticking the box for Treasury so, the books look well balanced. We have a moral responsibility to ensure that people with disability have the best quality of care and they're looked after. And in New South Wales, we've done a reasonable job. We still have a long way to go in terms of disability inclusion.
The Minister for Disability Services, Ray Williams, declined our request for an interview. But in a statement, his department said privatisation is all part of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, or NDIS. At this point, it's important for you to understand how the NDIS works. Now, I realise few things in life are as dull as bureaucracy, so I'll try to make this quick and painless. Until recently, governments funded organisations and services that support people with disability. But under the NDIS, the money is instead given to the individual. This is supposed to create a marketplace where people with disability have more buying power. They can choose the provider that best suits them, because nobody's needs are the same.
The philosophical thing that sits under it is that people with disabilities will have choice and control. They will be empowered to determine what they need in their lives, and they will become consumers.
That's Marianne Diamond from the federal government agency in charge of the scheme.
The National Disability Insurance Scheme is the biggest transformation in our country since the introduction of universal health care.
It sounds good in theory, and the NDIS has broad, in-principle support, even from its critics. But there's a reason Lynn Clinkett is so nervous about the changes. She says her son Matt has been kicked out of 3 privately run daytime activity programs. He was too difficult for staff to control, she says. He demanded too much from them. And so when Matt's group home changes hands, Lynn's afraid he'll be evicted from there too.
If they can't manage to care for him for 20 hours a week with 2 people to 1 Matt, how are they going to care for him 24/7?
If the private operator did kick Matt out eventually, can't he just shop around?
Where to? This whole area is under the umbrella of one provider.
The only provider open to Matt is Mid-North Coast Disability Services. It's a consortium of non-government organisations, and it'll be taking over all the government group homes in the region. The consortium will have to keep the staff it inherits and maintain their pay and conditions for 2 years. They'll also take on residents like Matt, but for an unspecified period of time. Unlike the workers, there's no rock-solid guarantee.
I'm sure along the way they'll be thinking, well, why would we have somebody like Matt when we can replace him with somebody who's very easy to manage?
If that were to happen, Lynn would have no choice but to leave the area. And she says that would be both unaffordable and unfair.
But nobody listens because it's, I suppose, only a small number of people of the total population of our state who are sort of going to fall through the cracks and fall by the wayside. So perhaps to the powers that be, that doesn't really matter. They're just collateral damage. But to us, they're our beloved children or sisters or brothers, and they do matter.
If you think Lynn's worried about the changes, spare a thought for elderly parents. Hello? Hi, Barbara. Meet Barbara Spode. She fears that if she dies first, her daughter India might end up on the street.
I've heard women say exactly the same, that they are afraid to die first, that they hope that their child will die before them.
At 79 years old, Barbara is a widow, and India has severe autism.
She has very challenging behaviour, Mostly hurting herself, banging her head, which is really so distressing to see, banging her head to the point of sometimes making it bleed when she is frustrated or when we don't know what has set her off, some deep feeling that we can't guess at. She sometimes hits people and then is immediately very, very sorry. She sometimes has put her head through a wall. At the moment, she tears her clothes and tears so many garments in a day. It's very difficult to keep up with her.
India needs full-time care, so she lives in a group home for people with disability in Sydney. On days between visits, Barbara chats with her daughter over Skype.
Is that India there? Hello, my darling.
India uses sign language to help communicate, and Barbara's learned it too. She interprets what her daughter is saying, then speaks back to her.
Will I tell you something new and different? Yes or no? Yes, all right. I'll tell you something new and different. It is that there is somebody visiting me today, and guess what his name is? His name is David. David.
Hi, India.
And how do you sign David? David. Yeah, that's right.
Oh, like this?
Yes.
India is 51 years old and has no immediate family other than Barbara.
She has no brothers and sisters. Her father is dead. Her stepfather, who was so important in her life, is dead. And frankly, I'm terrified, and I'm not being melodramatic when I say I'm afraid to die before India.
Barbara didn't always feel this way. India's group home is run by the New South Wales government, and for the most part, Barbara's been happy with the quality of care. Things go wrong, of course, but when they do, she's been satisfied with the way complaints were handled.
I can rely on that public disability service because there's the responsibility through layers of bureaucracy. Ultimately, the Minister and the Government of New South Wales are responsible for her care.
If something horrible was to happen to Barbara, she'd always assumed India would have permanent accommodation and would be okay.
I myself have had 3 different cancers and I am really well. But at almost 80, I have to face the fact that one of those cancers might come back, something else might happen, I might notice the bus bearing down on me, and I thought India will be cared for.
What was your reaction when you first learned that the New South Wales government was withdrawing from the provision of these services?
Initially, incredulity. How could that be? And then terrible, deep anger and, of course, fits of despair and depression.
One of the organisations vying for the contract to run India's group home is called New Horizons. Barbara recently found a copy of a service agreement it's previously asked residents or their carers to sign. And she says the bar for eviction is set way too low.
It included things like violence or the threat of violence, or deliberate damage of property, or breaking of house rules. Now, some of our people, not all of the people with complex needs, but some of the people with complex needs have them precisely because they do express their frustrations through doing things like kicking a hole in the door or banging their heads on a window that may break or slapping the staff member that tries to stop them from doing whatever it is. So clearly, that particular company had not thought through what people with complex needs were like.
In a statement, New Horizons told me if they're chosen to run India's group home, the service agreement won't be the same as the one I've seen. They said the terms and conditions would be set not by them, but by the relevant state government department. But when I tried to confirm this with the department, they said the federal government agency in charge of the NDIS would be responsible. It's no wonder families are anxious and confused. In any case, the detail in these contracts is confidential for now. So I decided to approach the peak body that represents the non-government providers, National Disability Services, to ask if they knew anything about the grounds for eviction. And Tony Pooley reckons Barbara's got nothing to worry about.
About 60% of the provision of disability services across the board is currently undertaken by non-government operators. So there's certainly a range of providers who take on the most complex clients and are very experienced at providing the appropriate level of care.
Tony Pooley admits some people like India who have challenging behaviour are turned away. But he says that's appropriate if they're not the right fit. They'll find another provider.
I certainly don't deny there have been occasions in the past where people have been exited from non-government services, just as there have been cases in the past where people have been exited from one government group home to the non-government sector, or from one government disability service to another government disability service. So that kind of change in the provision of services is not entirely unusual, and in fact is actively encouraged as part of the new National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Barbara Spode remains sceptical. A year or so ago, she raised her concerns about her daughter's future with a top executive from the state government department in charge of government-run group homes. But she claims she was brushed aside.
And I asked him what would happen if my daughter was ejected because she was so difficult and they didn't have enough staff funding to be able to meet her needs and balance their books. Was she going to be put out on the street sitting on her furniture? And I had the images in my mind of those people who were put out on footpaths, sitting on their beds and their suitcases during the Great Depression, when they were evicted from often charity-owned, church-owned properties. Or was she going to be brought home to me, older than 80 by then, to look after?
The executive was Jim Longley. He's the Deputy Secretary of Ageing, Disability and Home Care in New South Wales.
And Mr. Longley's reply was, well, the NDIS package belongs to her and you can look for another provider. That continues to be the answer of the government. Find somebody else.
That could be tough for some. Soon, the New South Wales government will no longer be the provider of last resort for the most vulnerable. But Jim Longley says Barbara's daughter will be in safe hands with the federal government.
With the establishment of the National Disability Insurance Agency, they're the ones who will now be the ones looking after the whole scheme. They're the ones who will ensure the provider of last resort and ensure that all of these arrangements go to maximise the choice and control of people with disability.
You say the NDIA will be the provider of last resort, but the Productivity Commission has described its current arrangements for that as poorly articulated. So it sounds like they're not ready to fulfil that role.
The scheme is still in transition, and the National Disability Insurance Agency is developing its processes, and the state of New South Wales is certainly working very hard with the NDIA to make sure that those capacities of the NDIA are fully up to speed and operational when we come to full scheme.
And do you think you're on track to achieve that?
Well, the National Disability Insurance Agency does have that responsibility. They are committed to delivering on that responsibility, and we're doing everything we can to help them.
Jim Longley can't say exactly how the federal government agency will act as the provider of last resort.
They will have the choice of how they wish to deliver that, whether they engage NGOs to deliver that, whether they do it themselves, whether they do it by block funding to ensure that there is standing capacity. All of those are options that are available to the NDIA.
But we don't know which one they've decided on yet.
Well, that's because the system is in transition at the moment.
On this particular sticking point, the NDIA didn't offer us any more detail. A statement is on our website. That this remains unresolved is frustrating for private and community organisations. They say they're prepared to be the provider of last resort if the NDIA needs them to be. They just want more detail. Here's Tony Pulley from National Disability Services again.
Certainly I'm confident that a non-government provider of last resort can be identified, and as long as the funding is sufficient for them, they'll be able to provide all cases. But the last resort provider is usually only a temporary arrangement until a more substantial and long-term provider is identified, and those tasks need to be undertaken, and that arrangement needs to be worked out between the National Disability Insurance Agency and non-government providers.
You're saying a non-government provider could step in as the provider of last resort, but shouldn't that have been organised by now, before the New South Wales government pulled out of providing disability housing?
Well, no actual home has yet transferred into the non-government sector in the current transfer of services. There have been successful providers that have been announced, but nobody has transferred. I think the first home is scheduled to transfer in September. Ideally, the provider of last resort provisions would have been resolved, and NDS has been urging the agency and indeed the government to resolve an arrangement around that for some years.
Is it regrettable that it's not been done yet?
I think there are many aspects of the whole transfer to this scheme for which it is regrettable we don't have enough detail yet, David. Absolutely.
Hello, my name's Harry Guinan.
Meet Harry Guinan. I catch up with him at his art class in Sydney. Harry's someone who's been living with the constant threat of eviction. And Harry, how old are you?
33.
Harry has Down syndrome and a long list of health problems. The death of his parents several years ago continues to be a source of anxiety. In what aspects of life does he struggle?
He struggles to understand his emotions and manage those emotions.
Harry's been moved around a lot. His sister Edwina tells me he's lived in 5 group homes in as many years, and he's been looking for a 6th. Although Harry has strong communication skills, he isn't always easy to look after. Take this example.
He caught a train down to Canberra and made his way to Parliament House, and he asked a security guard to see Julia Gillard because he wanted to ask Julia Gillard about a new place for him to live, about a house. And when he was told Julia Gillard was overseas, he just left, and the police picked him up wandering around, and I had to drive down to Canberra to pick him up. So, but there were some other incidents like that as well. His risk-taking just got too difficult.
After this and a few other episodes, Harry moved into a non-government group home. But his behaviour regressed even further.
Staff used to sit in the courtyard and smoke and talk, and Harry liked to sit with them and talk, and he took up smoking. He still smokes, and that's an exacerbating factor in his thyroid condition, his heart condition, his sleep apnea.
Harry was moved again, this time to a group home run by Sunnyfield, a not-for-profit organisation. In the 20 or so months he's been there, there have been 6 different managers. Edwina says the high staff turnover has resulted in gaps in his care, and she's complained.
Staff didn't take him to a blood test they were meant to, so his overactive thyroid was not managed for 4 months until my sister realised. They ignored repeated requests from me to take him to see his psychologist over a 10-month period. I know of an instance where he was not supervised taking his medication, and he later showed me the medication that he was meant to take.
During this period, Harry admits he acted out at times, occasionally putting himself in harm's way. There were also complaints from residents who Sunnyfield claims were intimidated by his behaviour. In February last year, Edwina received this letter from Sunnyfield.
I am writing to advise you that transition for Harry Guinan has not been successful into the shared living service at Sunnyfield. Therefore, Harry needs to be exited from our group home as soon as possible.
Harry was about to be kicked out.
We respectfully request another candidate be matched to the group home in order to fill the vacancy with an alternate suitable placement as soon as possible.
What was your response when you found out that Sunnyfield had given Harry an exit notice?
We were angry because Sunnyfield did know about his support needs. We were at pains to emphasise his support needs and his challenging behaviour before he moved in.
The news was upsetting for Harry. He doesn't want to leave. When you found out that you had to leave the house you're in now, how did you feel about that?
A bit sad at the time because I made some friends around the local community, and there has been some issues around the place at the house which I'm not very keen about talking about, so I won't.
Harry's ashamed of how he's behaved in the past, and he's trying to do better. I understand you've apologised for that?
Yes, correctly.
And so after you apologised, were you hoping you could stay?
Yes.
And how did you feel when you were told that you would have to leave?
Quite disappointed. I was hoping to stay, but things have changed in management and they've said no, you can't.
Sunnyfield declined to be interviewed and wouldn't go into detail about Harry's case for privacy reasons. But in a statement, they said residents are evicted if they're not fitting in or can't be supported. And they said they've discussed the reasons behind their decision with both Harry and Edwina and the relevant authorities. Edwina thinks Harry's challenging behaviour is a response to his frustration with having a disability.
Harry has to come to terms with the fact that he'll never be able to join the army or go backpacking overseas or go to uni or drive a car or even have the kind of social life that you and I have. He doesn't like having a disability. He wants to be like other people. He wants to do what other people do and live those kind of lives.
Harry finds comfort in fantasy. He uses writing to escape reality.
He's written a few novels about it, he's the protagonist and he works on a cattle station in far north Queensland and lives a very rugged life.
The horses were good stock horses and suitable for the job, so it worked out fine for us. Although the horses started behaving badly a bit of the time, so we didn't finish until late 9:30. We drove the cattle in, locked the cattle in, unsaddled the horses and went up for dinner. Cody and I had a steak and sausage and tomato sauce on the side, which was beautiful.
But Harry's reality is very different. He's facing imminent eviction, and Sunnyfield is ramping up the pressure. They've given him a final deadline, and if he hasn't gone by then, they say they'll force him to go.
Sunnyfield says that if Harry tries to access the house, they will take appropriate steps to remove him.
It's been so hard to find Harry another home, Sunnyfield had repeatedly pushed back the deadline for his eviction. But they're now drawing a line in the sand. Luckily for Harry, there's been a last-minute reprieve. After 18 months, the New South Wales government has found room for him in one of its group homes. Harry's relieved the search is over.
It took a long while, a very long while, and hearing the news from Edwina, I was more like excited. And it's been nerve-wracking a lot of times, but I've managed to pull through. I do have very high anxieties, but I have pulled through that considerably well.
But Harry still has a reason to be anxious. The government-run group home he's moving into will, of course, soon be privatised. Whoever takes over will have to hold on to current staff for 2 years. But there's a question mark over the promises being made to residents. Edwina's been told Harry and his neighbours will be given that same 2-year assurance, although she worries about what will happen beyond that period of time.
Who wanted this 2-year clause in and why was it put in? I don't think it would be there if service providers didn't think that they would need to use that 2-year clause. And yeah, I am worried about what happens when that 2 years is up. They might think someone else is better than Harry for that spot.
I put this to Tony Pooley from National Disability Services. It certainly looks like that once that 2-year period is over, non-government providers will slash pay and conditions for staff and potentially kick out any residents they don't want.
Yeah, I think that's a worst-case scenario, David. Non-government services are in the business of the provision of services to people with disabilities, and some of them have been doing that for more than 100 years. And it's not in their interest to immediately kick people out. The 2-year limit comes as a part of the transfer of services and the guarantee that the government has provided to its employees. I can assure you that non-government services did not seek the 2-year guarantee as part of the transfer of services.
Edwina and Harry are trying to remain positive. Harry's been painting a lot in his art class. It calms him. When I visit, he shows me his latest masterpiece, a work on canvas. It's inspired by a photograph of graffiti he found on the internet. And how long do you think this one will take?
Probably pretty much the whole day, up until 2:30.
He's also using meditation and prayer to keep a lid on his behaviour. Edwina's hoping he'll settle into his new home without incident. What they need now is stability, not uncertainty.
He definitely wants to do the right thing. And we've come a really long way, and I'm really proud of how he's doing.
Edwina is my heart. She's family. She's blood and bone. And Edwina and I will pull through like anything else. Edwina's heart strong, I'm heart strong. Even though I've got a pacemaker, we're both heart strong. We're fingers crossed. We'll get through anything.
Background Briefing's coordinating producer is Linda McGuinness. Our sound engineer this week is Russell Stapleton. The series producer is Jess O'Callaghan. Suzanne Smith is our executive producer. You can subscribe to Background Briefing wherever you listen to podcasts or hit Explore and Listen on the ABC radio app. I'm David Lewis. Thanks for listening.